How did a small tribe from Central Asia establish a vast empire spanning 3 continents, only to eventually disappear in the annals of history? At its peak, the Ottoman Empire's territory stretched across most of the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. It began as an insignificant regional power in northwestern Anatolia, later embarking on a remarkable period of territorial expansion. Concurrently, it developed rapidly in its political, social, and economic systems, creating one of the world's most diverse and prosperous empires. But what ultimately became of this once powerful state? And how did it shape modern-day Turkey? To fully understand the establishment of the Ottoman Empire, one must first grasp the background of the Turkic people's migration from East Asia. Originally an Asian people, the Turks gradually migrated westward from East Asia, traversing the vast Eurasian steppe. By the 7th century AD, they reached the area around the Alay Mountains near what are now the borders of Russia, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia. Over the following centuries, they continued migrating south and west, with some eventually adopting a semi-nomadic lifestyle around the Caspian and Aral seas. One of the main Turkic tribes that settled there was the Oghuz tribe. However, in the late 10th century, a chieftain named Seljuk from one of this tribe's many clans decided to break away from the main tribe and establish his own dynasty. In the decades following the new millennium, Seljuk and his descendants laid the foundations of the Seljuk Empire by expanding into Persia. Heavily influenced by Persian language and culture, they not only adopted Persian culture but also converted to Islam. By the 1060s, the Seljuks had advanced to the borders of the Byzantine Empire in western Anatolia. Sporadic conflicts between the two states eventually escalated into the Byzantine-Seljuk Wars. At the Battle of Manzikert in 1071, the Seljuks dealt a crushing blow to the Byzantine army. This victory allowed them to gain control over the Near East and penetrate deeper into what is now Turkey. Over the next 2 centuries, the Seljuk Empire gradually declined and fragmented into multiple smaller Turkic states. Yet, the Turks maintained significant influence in Anatolia. The most notable among these was the Sultanate of Rum. However, by the early 14th century, the Sultanate of Rum also declined and fragmented, forming even smaller principalities known as Anatolian beyliks. It was from among these tribes in northwestern Turkey that a warlord emerged, who would become the founder of the later Ottoman Empire. Although historical records about his life and rule are unreliable and sparse, he is still considered the originator of the dynasty that bears his name. For about a century after Osman's rule, they focused on conquering the remnants of the Byzantine Empire. This empire, which once ruled over much of the eastern Mediterranean, was reduced by the 14th century to southern parts of the Balkan Peninsula, mainland Greece, the Greek islands, and a small territory in Turkey. The Byzantine capital was Constantinople, the most fortified city of the Middle Ages, which withstood countless sieges for centuries. The Ottoman capture of the city of Nicaea in 1331 was a significant step in Ottoman expansion. In 1369, Adrianople, located just 200 kilometers from Constantinople near the present-day borders of Greece, Bulgaria, and Turkey, also fell to the Ottomans and briefly served as their capital. Subsequently, the Ottomans conquered Serbia and Bulgaria. In the early 15th century, the Ottoman Empire experienced a brief period of internal turmoil. But in 1451, Mehmed II ascended the Ottoman throne again, determined to conquer Constantinople once and for all. In early April 1453, he besieged the city. After 7 weeks of fierce fighting, the walls were breached, and Ottoman forces poured into the city. Symbolically, the last Byzantine emperor was Constantine XI, sharing the name of Constantine I, the city's founder over 1,000 years earlier, for whom Constantinople was named. On May 29, 1453, Constantine XI died in battle, and the city was completely occupied by the Ottomans. Constantinople then became the capital of the burgeoning Ottoman Empire. To mark their conquest, the Ottomans converted the Hagia Sophia, built over 900 years earlier by Emperor Justinian, into a mosque, soon adding 4 minarets at its corners. The conquest of the Byzantine Empire and the fall of Constantinople were just the beginning of the Ottoman rise. Over the following centuries, the Ottomans expanded and conquered in the eastern Mediterranean, the Middle East, North Africa, the Balkans, and the Black Sea region. In the early 1460s, Mehmed II quickly conquered the Morea in Greece, the Empire of Trebizond in northern Turkey, and Bosnia in the Balkans. By his death in 1481, the Ottoman realm had expanded into southern and eastern Turkey, conquered Albania, and sent expeditions to the Crimean Peninsula in the mid-1470s. establishing Ottoman influence on the northern Black Sea coast. His successor, Bayezid II, was also a formidable ruler during his 30-year reign, by competing for regional hegemony with the Egyptian Mamluks and achieving victory. He incorporated new territories in Syria and the Levant into the empire. Additionally, between 1499 and 1503, he waged war against the Republic of Venice, which controlled many islands and trade routes, consolidating Ottoman control over the Aegean Sea. His successor, Suleiman I, is also noteworthy. Although he ruled for only 8 years from 1512 to 1520, he conquered almost all of North Africa. In 1517, his army defeated the Mamluks at the Battle of Rydania, bringing most of Egypt and Libya under Ottoman rule. In 1519, Hayreddin Barbarossa, who ruled much of Algeria and Tunisia, agreed to become an Ottoman vassal. Perhaps the most famous Ottoman sultan was Suleiman the Magnificent, whose reign marked the peak of imperial expansion, ruling for half a century from 1520 to 1566. Under his governance, the Ottoman Empire rose to become one of the world's foremost powers. He completed the conquest of most of the Balkans, leading his army to the gates of Vienna. His siege of Vienna in 1529 was unsuccessful. In 1522, he captured Rhodes from the Knights of St. John. In 1551, he captured Tripoli in North Africa and extended influence into the Arabian Peninsula and Iraq. By the end of his reign, the Ottoman Empire stretched from Hungary and the northern Black Sea coast in the north to Egypt and Oman in the south, and from Algeria in the west to the Caspian Sea coast in the east. The success of Ottoman expansion was largely due to its elite military, which integrated well-trained infantry, cavalry, and artillery in a balanced force unmatched at its peak. The elite among them were the Janissaries. These soldiers were child slaves taken from Christian regions in Anatolia and Europe, forced to convert to Islam, and then enlisted into the Ottoman army. They underwent strict discipline and professional training, becoming a highly effective fighting force. With this advantageous position in the early 16th century, the Ottomans consolidated their power and engaged in wars with Christian Europe over the next 2 centuries. In the early phase of this multi-front conflict, the Ottoman Empire primarily vied for control of the Mediterranean with Spain, the dominant power in the region at the time. Spain controlled southern Italy and many Italian islands and led Christian coalitions attempting to curb the expansion of the Muslim Ottomans. For decades, war raged between the Turks and the Spanish, culminating in 2 major battles in 1565 and 1571. The first was the Great Siege of Malta, where the Ottomans attempted to capture Malta from the Knights of St. John. Decades earlier, the Knights, having lost Rhodes, were given Malta by the Spanish crown as compensation. The siege ended in Ottoman failure. In 1571, another Christian coalition led by Spain dispatched a large fleet against the Ottoman Empire, further halting its Mediterranean expansion. The Battle of Lepanto occurred off the coast of northwestern Greece, involving over 400 ships and 130,000 men. Once again, the Ottomans were defeated, although this victory made Christian nations realize the Ottoman threat could be contained to some extent. From the Ottoman perspective, this setback merely shifted their expansion focus to other parts of Europe. Since defeating the Hungarians at the Battle of Mohawks in 1526, the Ottoman Empire had come tantalizingly close to complete control of Central Europe. The only obstacle was Vienna, the Austrian capital on the Danube. Despite their failed siege of Vienna in 1529 under Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, a new siege was launched in 1683. The Ottoman Empire deployed over 150,000 troops but ultimately failed to capture the city. On September 12, relief forces of the Christian Holy League, led by Polish King John III Sobieski, arrived. In history's largest cavalry charge, 18,000 horsemen stormed the Ottoman camp, routing the Ottoman army. The defeat at Vienna became a turning point in Ottoman expansion into Europe. Thereafter, they never gained new territory on the European continent. From the late 17th to early 18th century, the Ottoman Empire began to gradually stagnate, entering a period of relative decline. This was largely due to the laxity of the sultans during this period, who increasingly adopted a laissez-faire attitude toward imperial governance. Previously, within the Ottoman governance system centered on the Topkapi Palace in Constantinople, sultans were typically actively involved in state affairs, especially during the 15th and early 16th centuries. However, as generations passed, day-to-day decision-making fell increasingly into the hands of the Grand Vizier and a small group of officials and administrators, while the sultans spent much of their time in the harem and gardens. The Ottoman governance system was largely decentralized. Provinces paid taxes to maintain the large military, but regions also enjoyed considerable autonomy under local rulers and governors. It was also a tolerant empire. While converting to Islam helped people advance socially, it was not compulsory. Christians and followers of other religions were accepted within the Ottoman Empire. It even became a major refuge for European Jews facing persecution and expulsion in countries like Spain. As early as 1519, cities like Thessaloniki became centers of early modern religious cosmopolitanism, with 54% of its population being Jewish at that time. The Ottoman Empire was initially very wealthy, with extensive trade networks extending from distant India and China via the Silk Road to Constantinople, Alexandria in Egypt, and cities in the Levant like Antioch and Damascus. However, as the world's economic center shifted from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, large ocean-going vessels carrying goods from the Americas and the Far East effectively bypassed the Ottoman Empire, reducing European reliance on overland trade routes passing through its territories. These routes thus gradually became obsolete. With economic stagnation and imperial decline, the Ottoman Empire began to lag behind its European rivals, who were undergoing the scientific revolution and benefiting from rapid technological advancements across fields. From the 18th century onward, the Ottoman position was no longer seen as a threat but rather as a weakness to be exploited. Lands they had conquered over centuries now seemed ripe for reclamation. Particularly, Russia and Austria began to take the offensive against the Ottomans, seizing Ottoman territories on the northern Black Sea coast, the Caucasus, and the Balkans. Meanwhile, in North Africa, local governors began seeking greater independence. By the late 18th century, Algeria, Tunisia, Tripolitania, and Egypt had effectively become sovereign regions, nominally still part of the Ottoman Empire. The situation became more severe in the 19th century. The Ottoman Empire was dubbed the sick man of Europe. As early as 1804, the Serbian uprising directly shook Ottoman control over the Balkans. Over the following decades, the empire continued to fragment. The Greek War of Independence broke out in 1821, and by 1829, Greece became an independent nation. Britain, France, and Russia, eager to weaken Ottoman influence in the region for their own interests, provided economic and military support to Greece. A year later, France invaded Algeria, completely ending nominal Ottoman rule there and beginning to establish a colony. Throughout the 19th century, especially in the 1850s, Russia sought to accelerate Ottoman decline further by expanding into Ottoman territories around the Black Sea. Unlike before, when Western Christian states would join wars against the Ottomans, Britain and France this time did not wish for the Ottoman Empire to collapse entirely. Partly to maintain the European balance of power and prevent any single nation from controlling too much territory or wielding excessive influence. Thus, they joined the war in defense of the Ottoman Empire. Victory in the Crimean War provided the declining Ottomans with a much-needed respite. However, during the 1860s-1880s, multiple new states emerged from Ottoman provinces in the Balkans. Romania and Serbia declared independence, and Bulgaria gained increasing autonomy. The Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russia again launched sustained offensives against the Ottomans, seizing their territories in the Balkans and the Caucasus. By the early 1910s, Italy seized Libya from the Ottoman Empire. Albania declared independence, and European powers began discussing the partition of the Ottoman Empire's remaining territories. This relentless decline caused concern among the younger generation in the Ottoman Empire, many of whom called for political reforms to mitigate the empire's decline and potentially revive it after 200 years of stagnation. Central to this movement were the Young Turks. This group hoped to replace the centuries-old sultanate and ministerial governance system with a modern constitutional monarchy, establishing Western-style parliaments and civil services. In 1908, they launched a revolution, successfully ushering in a period of constitutional government. However, the Young Turks were a loose political coalition of liberals, intellectuals, and more conservative elements including the military, making governance by consensus impossible. From the 1908 revolution through the 1910s, internal political turmoil persisted within the Ottoman Empire, further hastening its collapse. The end of the Ottoman Empire resulted from intertwined internal and external factors, closely linked to the outbreak of World War I. Prior to this, the Ottomans had avoided involvement in the two major military alliances formed by European powers in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. When war broke out in 1914, the Ottomans saw it as an opportunity to counter a century of Russian expansion and thus decided to join the side of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, becoming part of the Central Powers. The Ottoman fate in the war was mixed. On one hand, they achieved a major victory against the ill-conceived Gallipoli campaign launched by British and Anzac forces. But in the Middle East and Levant, the Arab Revolt of 1916 to 1918, aided by British officer T. E. Lawrence, caused them to lose most of those territories. The empire also had a darker, more brutal episode during the war, the genocide against Armenians starting in 1915. Estimated to have caused 1.5 million deaths. Overall, the war was a disaster for the Ottoman Empire. Like Germany and Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire could not sustain the war effort. By 1918, its armies collapsed on multiple fronts. After World War I ended, the victorious Allied powers, Britain, France, Greece, and Italy, which switched sides in 1916, occupied most of the Ottoman lands and began considering its post-war future. The Ottoman Empire's remaining territories in the Levant and the Middle East were partitioned between Britain and France, becoming mandates under their respective empires. The Ottoman Empire was thus confined to the core area of present-day Turkey. But even the territorial integrity of this area was soon threatened by Greek and Italian territorial claims. Greece sought to annex lands where its people had lived in Byzantine and ancient Greek times, while Italy sought control of islands like Rhodes as compensation for its participation in the war. All this eventually sparked an uprising in May 1919 against the Allied occupation of Ottoman lands. This conflict, known as the Turkish War of Independence, lasted 4 years and ultimately led to the birth of the modern Turkish state and the end of the Ottoman Empire. Early in the war, the remnant Ottoman government in Constantinople chose to cooperate with the Allies in an attempt to preserve what little remained of the empire. Their opponents were Turkish nationalists, led by former Ottoman General Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who controlled much of central Turkey. Initially, the nationalists suffered significant military losses as Greek and other Allied forces advanced inland. However, between 1921 and 1922, the Turkish nationalists resisted fiercely, gradually driving the Greeks and other Allied forces out of mainland Turkey. A favorable armistice was successfully reached in October 1922. The following year, under Ataturk's leadership, the Grand National Assembly in Ankara was recognized as the legitimate government of Turkey. The signing of the Treaty of Lausanne formally recognized the independence of the modern Republic of Turkey. Officially ending the war, the capital was moved from Constantinople to Ankara. Thus, the Ottoman Empire, which had ruled parts of the Middle East, North Africa, and Eastern Europe for over 600 years, was formally abolished and ceased to exist.